Hey everyone, this video is going to be about missing people and how they disappeared without a trace. So, if you're prepared for it, pull up a stump with me, sit tight, and enjoy the video. Thank you for watching. This first case takes us all the way to Hawaii in July of 1941. At this time, much of the world was embroiled in the heat of World War II, and the United States was just months away from joining the war in December of the same year. The man that takes us all to Hawaii is Commander Thomas Calloway Latimore. He was born in Tennessee on June 28th of 1890. Thomas entered the U.S. Naval Academy in 1910, of which he graduated and was commissioned an ensign 4 years later in 1914. By 1917, still in the midst of World War I, he had been promoted to junior lieutenant. A cool little fact about Thomas is that he was actually serving as the acting governor of American Samoa from April 10th to 17th of 1934. Just wanted to throw that in there, cool little tidbit. After a brief time in D.C. doing naval intelligence, Thomas was given command of the destroyer ship, the USS Dobbin, in April 1941 at Pearl Harbor. So, Latimore was said to be a pretty quiet guy. He kept to himself a lot and was a pretty solitary man. He soon found joy in hiking after he arrived on Oahu in Hawaii, in the very undeveloped area of the Aiea mountain range, the mountain range that overlooked Pearl Harbor. Curiously, a yeoman second class by the name of Kenneth Isaacs, who was assigned to the destroyer USS Dobbin that Thomas was the commander of, he noted one time that the commander had come back to the ship with an arm injury. Thomas said that he had heard it in a fall and had his arm in a cast for a while after this. Now this is where we get into the murky territory of his last known whereabouts and disappearance. So as we said, he enjoyed hiking in that mountain range. By July 1941, at 51 years of age, Thomas headed into those areas that he had always hiked with his walking stick, khaki uniform, and old hat, and walked off the face of the earth. He was never found, seen, or heard from after this. When he failed to come back, hundreds of sailors and local police scoured the Aiea Mountains, looking for any trace of him. Trackers with dogs were brought in from Schofield Barracks, and they found nothing, not a trace. A naval investigation was launched into his disappearance, and was the subject of local news coverage, but it amounted to nothing. His disappearance was eventually totally overshadowed by the Pearl Harbor attack, and on July 19th of 1942 he was officially declared dead. Now, his vanishing wasn't without its share of conspiracy theories. One such theory involved the sitting president at the time, FDR, who by some it is claimed that he knew of the attack on Pearl Harbor and allowed it to happen in order to make the American public more apt to war. Thomas comes into this as the theory suggests that he had forewarning of the attack due to his history in naval intelligence and purposely disappeared before the attack. Another popular theory is that he may have been abducted and killed by the Hawaiian-Japanese spy ring that was operating at the time, because he was either targeted by them or stumbled onto their operations beforehand. But what do you think happened? Do you think that he did indeed have knowledge of an attack on the U.S. by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor? Do you think that he was killed? Do you think that he may have had an encounter before and that's where the previous injury came from, and then he went back in and that's when they got him? Maybe he simply got lost. Maybe he just fell while hiking and the whole thing was an accident. Let me know what you think down in the comments. This next disappearance comes to us from La Crosse, Wisconsin, and is the vanishing of Evelyn Hartley. She was born in La Crosse on November 21st, 1937, which would have made her 15 by the time of her disappearance. On October 24th, 1953, Viggo Rasmussen, a professor at La Crosse State College, which is now called the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, hired Evelyn, who was the daughter of another professor, Richard Hartley, to look after his 20-month-old daughter. That evening, her father called the Rasmussen house to check up on his daughter. He called several times and received no answer. When she did not check in at the agreed-upon time of 8:30 p.m., her father grew concerned. Her father, Richard, drove to the Rasmussen home to find the doors locked, the lights on, and the radio was also on. There were items scattered all over the house. The living room furniture was all over the place, as were Evelyn's school books. Her shoes were found in different rooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. He found his daughter's broken glasses upstairs as well. Evelyn was not present in the house. Every room in the house was locked, except one in the basement that was located at the back of the house. There was a missing screen on an open window, and the screen was placed against the outside wall. Pry marks were on some of the windows, a stepladder belonging to the homeowner, and footprints were in the areas of the house. There was blood on the inside of the house and in the yard. Bloody handprints had been 100 feet away from a nearby garage and in a nearby house. The child was asleep and unharmed. Police thought that someone must have taken Evelyn through the yard but dropped her before carrying her further to explain the blood. Police dogs were used to pick up her scent and trail, which ended 2 blocks away. From there, it was thought that Evelyn was put into a vehicle and driven away. They were both told by one neighbor that they had seen a car repeatedly driving up and down and around the neighborhood. A person who lived nearby claimed they heard screams an hour earlier. The person thought the screams were simply children playing outside. 2 days later, a local resident, Ed Hoffer, told police that while driving his vehicle, he was almost hit by a Buick as it was speeding in a westerly direction. Inside the Buick, Hoffer reported seeing one man was driving the vehicle, while a second man was in the back seat with a girl. Several days later, various items of clothing, many of which were stained with blood, were found at different locations. Blood from the jacket matched Evelyn's blood type. Over 1,000 members of the local community, including law enforcement, the National Guard, Boy Scouts, La Crosse State College students and faculty, the Civil Air Patrol, and the USAF all participated in the search in October 1953. A vehicle inspection program was also undertaken with the intent of searching every single vehicle in La Crosse County. Gas station attendants were asked to check on the cars for bloodstains. Recent graves were reopened to determine if Evelyn's remains were placed in a recent burial plot or not. In May of the following year, 1954, mass lie detector tests were conducted on La Crosse area high school boys in an attempt to find more information about Evelyn's disappearance. Though local authorities had planned to test 1,750 students and faculty, the testing was controversial and was halted after only 300 were tested. After his arrest, murderer Ed Gein was considered a suspect in Evelyn's disappearance, and as he was visiting a relative just a few blocks away from the Rasmussen house at the time. However, Gein denied involvement in the disappearance and passed 2 lie detector tests. Police found no trace of Evelyn's remains during a search of Gein's Fairfield property. In November 1957, authorities announced that Gein had been cleared of any connection with the disappearances of both Evelyn and Georgia Reckler, an 8-year-old who disappeared in 1947. So one thing is for sure. We know that Evelyn was unfortunately murdered and had Lord knows what happened to her in her final hours. But why was she targeted? Was it premeditated? How long were the people outside the windows trying to get in? A body nor the criminals were ever found. What do you think happened? Was she the victim of a sinister plot? Hopefully one day, closure will be found. This next case takes us to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in June of 1969 and is the case of Dennis Lloyd Martin, who was only a 60-year-old boy at the time. So Dennis and his family were actually residents of Knoxville, and they were just visiting the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They did so every year as part of a Father's Day tradition with his father, William C. Martin, and grandfather, Clyde E. Martin. It seemed to be a thing for the men of the family to do because his older brother was there as well. So there was 4 men. There was Dennis, his older brother, his father, and grandfather. And the first day and night of their Father's Day tradition went off without a hitch. The family hiked from Cades Cove to Russell Field, where they camped overnight. The next day, they hiked to Spence Field near the Appalachian Trail, where they planned to spend the night there as well. So this is where we get to the day of the disappearance, which again was June 14th. It was around 4 p.m., and Dennis and his older brother, along with some other children from a separate family, were intending on surprising the adults when they came back. So he was last seen by his father going behind a bush to hide, intending on surprising the adults with the other children. However, after the rest of the children came back, Dennis Martin did not. It had only been 5 minutes, and when all the other children had returned to the campsite, they realized that he was gone. His father frantically searched for him, running 2 miles down the trail until he was sure he could not have gotten any further. After several hours, they sought help from the National Park Service rangers. The area where Martin disappeared is marked by steep slopes and ravines. Wild animals such as copperhead snakes, bears, feral hogs, and bobcats do inhabit the area. A downpour also broke out shortly after Martin's disappearance, dropping 3 inches of rain in a matter of hours, which washed out trails and caused streams to flood. Temperatures on the night of June 14th dropped by nearly 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. As a side note, I always find it really, mysterious or bizarre that the rain seems to happen, right after the disappearances. Pretty much right when they try to search is when it starts raining or some kind of other weather happens. It kind of puts you in mind that something is trying to prevent the parents or the park rangers from finding the child. But that's just an offhanded opinion that's not really related to the case. It's just a question that I had or a thought. So the search efforts, including a search by the National Guard and the Special Forces, found no trace. Heavy rains during the first day really hampered what they could do, and the heavy mist the next day really kind of messed up how far they could see and what they could really find and do. Up to 1,400 people were involved in the search effort, potentially obscuring possible clues. I assume because some of them were probably volunteers who, while meaning well, they don't have experience, and too many people in one area searching for someone can really too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing. But footprints were found in the area, but they were dismissed by park rangers as having been left by a Boy Scout who was also participating in the search. The child-sized footprints led to a stream where they disappeared. The tracks indicated that one foot was barefoot and the other was an Oxford type of shoe, the type of shoe that Martin was wearing, or something like a tennis shoe. Retired park ranger and author Dwight McCarter believes that the prints actually belonged to Martin, and the tracks were not part of a group, and none of the Boy Scouts were searching while barefoot. A shoe and a sock were also found. But June 22nd, 56 square miles, or 150 kilometers squared, of ground had been covered. More than 1,000 searchers continued to look until June 26th, when the search was cut back. The search was then abandoned 3 days later on the 29th. And months later in September of the same year, September 14th, the search was abandoned. It's still the largest search in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park as of this year. Dennis's father offered up a reward of $5,000 US, which would be equivalent to about $35,000 today. He wanted information, anything he could find to maybe try to get his son back. Psychics, including Gene Dixon, offered clues, but nothing was found. A few years after, a ginseng hunter claimed to have discovered scattered skeletal remains of a small child in a big hollow. He, however, kept the find to himself until 1985 because he feared that he would be prosecuted for the illegal ginseng. A subsequent search turned up again nothing. The unsuccessful search for Martin led the National Park Service to review and amend its policies on searches for missing people. But there were a couple theories, 3 to be exactly that are listed here, and I'll give the source in the description. So the first theory is that he became lost and just perished from exposure, or some other cause, likely during the first night. This is the most probable theory according to park officials. The second is that he was attacked by a hungry bear, or less likely a feral hog or another animal, and was carried off. The third is that he was abducted, taken out of the park by someone. His father was a proponent of this theory. On the afternoon that Martin disappeared, a tourist by the name of Harold Kay and his family heard an enormous, sickening scream, and shortly thereafter witnessed an unkempt, rough-looking man running up the trail where the scream had come from. Harold thought the man who got into a white car may have been a moonshiner. Park rangers and the Federal Bureau of Investigation concluded that there was insufficient link to from this sighting to the one of the disappearance, because Martin had disappeared 5 miles away and there was nothing really to connect the two. So hopefully one day closure will be found, or there will be some remains or something will be found to find out what exactly happened to Dennis Martin. But what do you think happened? Did he die of exposure the first night because of the terrible weather conditions? Was he attacked by a wild animal and carried off and or eaten? Do you think that you might agree with his father, who thought he was abducted by somebody? Or do you think something else happened? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, these sources will be posted in the description. So if you happen to like the video, consider liking the video or subscribing or both. If you want to support the channel in a different way, then I have links in the description where you can do so there. Thank you for watching and have a good night or day or wherever you are, wherever you're watching this. Thank you.